In this report, we'll offer an introduction to disaster recovery as a service, also known by its acronym DRaaS. Disaster recovery as a service continues to gain real momentum in the computing world today. In fact, researcher Gartner noted the number of organizations using DR as a service will exceed the number of organizations using traditional recovery services by the end of the year. In addition, Gartner analysts expect the disaster recovery as a service market to triple in size, reaching a staggering $3.4 billion by 2019. In this program, we'll explore the details of DR as a service so that viewers may gain insight and understanding into this growing disaster recovery option for enterprises today. This program features expert Peter Vescovo, Chief Operating Officer and partner at New York-based Island Tech Services. Island Tech Services is a leading provider of advanced technology, mobility, and vehicle solutions to business professionals, first responders, and public sector employees. There are several teaching points in this program. First, an overview of today's business continuity and disaster recovery landscape. Next, we'll explain disaster recovery as a service and hear why it may be a better option over more traditional backup plans. Then, we'll discuss what organizations should think through before implementing disaster recovery as a service. We'll then conclude the program by offering several best practices for organizations considering DRaaS solutions. Now, let's begin our report. Business continuity and disaster recovery plans are critical to any size business today. A recent survey and report by the IT research organization Gartner revealed current BCDR trends and the mindsets of IT leaders regarding their business continuity and disaster recovery plans and solutions. According to the survey, about 80% of study respondents have had an occurrence in the previous 2 years that required the utilization of an IT disaster recovery plan. 23% of respondents indicated cloud-based recovery is now the preferred choice for critical IT infrastructure services. The survey group anticipated that disaster recovery budgets will be on the increase. 37% of the organizations target the restoration of mission-critical business processes in less than 60 minutes, with 67% targeting less than 4 hours. The survey also identified database replication and storage-based replication as the predominant data protection methods. Finally, 34% of the Gartner survey respondents use disaster recovery orchestration tools in production. So it seems clear that business continuity disaster recovery continues to be a weighty issue for organizations today. Let's turn to our guest expert, Peter Vescovo, Chief Operating Officer and partner at New York-based Island Tech Services, and ask if he feels organizations are doing enough when it comes to their BCDR plans, policies, and preparedness.
The current landscape today is that more people are looking at it as something that's important for their business. They really have to think about, is their data and their business continuity, can their business survive if something was to happen? And a lot of companies out there are producing a lot of services for that reason. I would say probably in the last year or two, a lot of companies are looking at it as a must-have, not a nice-have, just because of the recent ransomware threats, a lot of cyber attacks. They're really thinking about, if anything happens to my data, how is my business going to function?
We asked Vescovo about his client's biggest concern when it comes to BCDR. We wanted to know what keeps them up at night.
So with the BCR and some of my customers, they don't know what's being backed up. They don't really have a plan in effect, and they want to come from full circle and really get something down on paper and really have a plan in place.
Data protection solutions are essential for businesses of all sizes to implement, regardless of size, industry, and geographic location. Downtime is real, and it can be very costly. According to researcher Aberdeen Group, the cost per hour of downtime can range between $9,000 to as high as $700,000, depending on the size of the organization. On average, a business may lose $164,000 per hour of downtime, including idle staff time. Data disasters does not discriminate based on the size of the organization. Over the past few years, 35% of small and mid-sized businesses lost as much as $500,000 due to downtime. Data backup answers the questions: is my data safe? And can I recover it in case of a failure? Business continuity, on the other hand, involves thinking about the business at a higher level and asks, how quickly can I get my business operating again in case of system failure? And when thinking about business continuity, rather than simple data backup and recovery, a key technique for organizations to consider is disaster recovery as a service. Simply stated, disaster recovery as a service is a process of replicating and hosting servers and their data through a third-party solution provider. In the case of an unexpected interruption or event, there would be a failover option in place. Our expert explained what goes on behind the scenes when a disaster recovery as a service solution is in operation.
So disaster recovery as a service works. In this diagram, you have virtual environments and physical servers and laptops that back up during the day on an hourly basis to an appliance while everyone's working. Then based on scheduling, you would schedule that data to go to the data center or the cloud in the off hours of the business. It's faster. It is better than traditional backups because, again, you have that disaster recovery option where you can spin up and you can get to your data a lot quicker.
We asked Vescovo what type of companies should take advantage of disaster recovery as a service.
I think everyone can take advantage of disaster recovery as a service, whether you're a small business, one-man shop. If you really find that your data is important to help run your business, you would just look at a smaller plan. It would be lower cost, but it would really most likely save your business or continue your business in case of a disaster.
Let's look at 3 common disaster recovery as a service solutions, each built on different types of technology. Here, we'll refer to them as self-service, assisted, and managed. Disaster recovery as a service solutions providers generally fall into one of these 3 categories. Note, however, there may be slight differences in these models among providers and the vendor products they offer. We'll now take a moment to explain each solution, starting with the self-service model. In this model, as the end user, you manage the tools and are responsible to perform DR backups and replication on your own. You monitor the status of the recovery environments and decide how frequently to perform testing to see if the solution is working as it should. If some type of disaster does happen, your IT organization is solely responsible for the recovery. This option is the least expensive and is really only a good choice if your IT team already has a significant amount of disaster recovery experience. Next is the assisted model. Note that not many disaster-as-a-service providers offer this type of option. In this model, the provider or vendor offers advice or mentoring to the client during implementation and testing. They will also assist with managing the overall solution. However, it's still up to you to deal with the details of DR planning and an actual disaster recovery. Your disaster-as-a-service solution provider will only step in when requested to back up your in-house team. There is some cost saving associated with this model, but like the self-service model, this option is best for organizations with some disaster recovery experience under their belt. Last but not least is the managed model. In this scenario, the disaster recovery as a service solution provider is responsible for building and managing the organization's DR plan. The vendor takes the lead on planning, implementation, and testing. They also create the DR strategy for the organization and are deeply involved in recovery in the event of a disaster. The managed model, as you might have guessed, is the most expensive option. This managed model is a good fit for organizations that need their technology talent more involved with business operations versus day-to-day IT tasks. With those thoughts in mind, let's return to our expert, Peter Vescovo, who offered his perspectives on the advantages of disaster recovery as a service solutions over the more traditional internally designed and managed backup and recovery plans.
Okay, so some of the advantages of disaster recovery as a service is having your data accessible within a couple of seconds of time, having that local spin-up of your data and continuing your business, and as a safety net, having the same data and the same spin-up in the cloud if your building was destroyed, fire or water. So traditional backups really just have your data and the accessibility of your data, and the recovery time is a lot longer with traditional backups, traditional recovery. Disaster recovery as a service is more that you have images of your server on that backup appliance, and you can spin them up, start them up on the network, and it really is your server.
Technology change can be a daunting challenge for organizations today. We asked our guest expert what should be considered before making a move to disaster recovery as a service.
Really what they should think about before they implement is, do they have people on board in their company that would want to take this on, whether you have an IT manager or someone that has some technology background, hiring a consultant and really putting a good plan together, and then really doing your homework and finding a vendor that's going to provide a good solution. There are many out there. Getting a vendor that knows your business or knows your industry is very helpful. Is a company that's stable, a vendor that really has been in business, been doing it a long time, is financially sound, really has a good product. Searching online is really the best thing to find out how people are loving or not liking their solution. And then really calling them up and starting to get the demos and really see what the console is, what the appliance is, and then really, if you love the solution, then you start talking about pricing. Pricing, I know for some small businesses is sometimes a big factor, but I think business should really look at this as something they have to have for their business moving forward, just because of all the ransomware and all the cyber attack threats.
The quest for a solution provider that's a perfect fit is never an easy task. Experts recommend that you ask the following key questions of potential disaster recovery as a service vendors to help flesh out their capabilities. The first question to ask is, do they offer testing? Second, ask if they have multiple backups and if they are in strategically placed locations. Third question, in the event of a disaster, who is on hand to help? The fourth question to ask the disaster recovery as a service provider is, can they meet your required service level agreements? Fifth on the list is, what kind of experience does the vendor have in providing disaster recovery as a service to customers? The sixth question on the list is about the provider's data center. Is it a commercial Tier 3 operation? Also, ask about physical security and if they have ISO 27001 and ISO 9001 accreditations. Now, listen in as Peter Vescovo offers some additional thoughts on key questions to ask during the vendor selection process.
So some of the questions are what solution they have, the security of the solution, what is the onboarding process, how do I test my data, how do I verify my data, do I have to increase the bandwidth in my network to get all the data to the cloud, what's that process of getting the initial data to the cloud, how intensive is it, do I have to have 3 people from my company, on the solution, and then really just response times, my data is my data. If I want to exit from the solution, how do I do that? What's the strategy? How do I move on? And then pricing. I always leave pricing for the end.
Turning back to the technology for a moment, some organizations today are choosing a hybrid approach to disaster recovery as a service, with some backups occurring on-site and some off-site. Vescovo discussed the hybrid approach and why some companies might opt for it.
Really, a lot of the solutions now is all-encompassing. Everything would be local, everything would be in the cloud, meaning that all of the servers that this appliance takes backups of will be local and in the cloud. I know if I had a backup solution in place, I would want to know that everything is locally here and it's also in the cloud.
Despite best efforts, there may be some challenges for organizations headed down the disaster recovery as a service path. We asked our expert about typical issues that organizations face when implementing disaster recovery as a service.
Some of the challenges that they face is really they have a question of security. How secure is my data in the cloud? Does anyone else have accessibility to it? So you have to kind of really bring them up to speed with technology about all the encryption that a lot of the cloud providers now are all on the same level. Everyone has really the same security for the cloud, so no one really could just access your data from a remote location per se. That's not their data. And really some of the other challenges are companies, in my perspective, they always ask about pricing. You know, they really want to make sure that it really fits into the budget. But I try to kind of really get over that hurdle with some companies and not really focus on the pricing, but focus on the solution and how it would really benefit their company.
Today's organizations must be focused on making wise and worthwhile technology investments. A good return on investment and total cost of ownership are a key measure of success. Peter Vescovo talked about TCO and disaster recovery as a service.
So the total cost of ownership of this really comes down to purchasing the appliance, which is really spec'd on protected storage, and your monthly fee. So really what we do is we evaluate all the servers that would be in an environment and how much data is on each server. That would be considered your protected storage. And then from that, we would say if there's 2 terabytes of protected storage, your device would be double that. So it'd be 4 terabytes of protected storage on the device. And that'll allow 3 months worth of local backups. And then there are other different plans for the cloud, whether it's infinite, 1-year retention, and you pay appropriately for that.
The downtime caused by disasters can be catastrophic, especially for small businesses, many of which never recover. The ability to avert disasters and effectively handle those that inevitably occur begins with knowledge. In today's report, we reviewed the business continuity and disaster recovery landscape. Then we explored disaster recovery as a service and heard why it might be a better option over more traditional BCDR plans. Then we learned what organizations should consider before implementing disaster recovery as a service. Next, we'll conclude the program with expert Peter Vescovo offering several best practices for organizations considering a disaster recovery as a service solution.
We usually have 5 guidelines for ensuring your critical information is safe. 1, put a business continuity plan in place. People often refer to disaster recovery plan, and that's important. However, business continuity plan may be even more important to the recovery and operation of the business. This plan outlines exactly what steps to take before, during, and after a threat or disaster, and enables business owners, managers, and employees to know how the businesses will continue to operate. 2, make sure you know exactly what is being backed up. Many different methods and devices claim to provide backup of servers, desktops, and laptops, including imaging all or certain data files. The level of data backup detail is critical to knowing whether your most important data assets will be protected or whether your systems are simply going through the motions. 3rd point is test your backup before a disaster hits. Make sure your backup system is put into place and is working well before a disaster. Some customers have simply pointed to a backup system in place, unsure of what is being backed up and when the last time a recovery has occurred. That's a recipe for an unhappy customer. 4th point, ensure proper training. Make sure that everyone who needs to back up or recover data in your office or organization understands the steps to do so. They must also understand the importance and sometimes the compliance and regulatory requirements that data holds for your business to operate properly. And 5, know who has your back. Your decision to select a backup provider should be based on more than cost. What is the local versus remote strategy? What is the response time? What are the hidden factors? Working with a managed service provider that has experience with providing backup solutions for your industry is key.
Vescovo then talked about his vision of the future for disaster recovery as a service.
What I see for the future with disaster recovery as a service is that really everyone should really think more about it. For any line of business, it should not really be something they should take lightly, especially with all the future attacks I would think would be more up and coming, ransomware, cyber attacks. So they really should, to run a business continuity and disaster recovery should really be a must-have for the business.
Our guest expert then offered a final bit of advice about making wise investments in technology solutions like disaster recovery as a service.
So my final thought is for a lot of customers out there is cheap is not always the best. look outside of the pricing and really look at the solution at hand and how it's going to work well for your business or industry.
Well, that concludes our report, The Importance of Disaster Recovery as a Service. We would like to thank Peter Vescovo, Chief Operating Officer at New York-based Island Tech Services, for sharing his knowledge and insight on this critically important topic. This is Michael Quinlan reporting, and thanks for watching.